Welcome to Culture Talk. This is a segment where we talk about the intersection of faith and pop culture and how culturally relevant topics can be used to start conversations about your faith. I'm joined here today by biochemist Fazale Rana. Thank you for joining me.
Sandra, great to be here.
You know, I love having conversations with you, not just about science and faith, but of course pop culture. Our brains totally click when we talk about comic books and superheroes. And you recently wrote a blog where you had a lead talking about your favorite comic book superhero. Who is that?
Well, it's one of my favorites. It's the Martian Manhunter. And probably people haven't heard about him, but he's part of the Justice League. And he's the last surviving Martian living here on Earth. He's a shapeshifter. And so he takes on a human form. John Jones, who's a police detective, he has, of course, superhuman strength and he can fly. But one of his most interesting superpowers is telepathy.
Telepathy. So let's talk about that, because that's a really kind of a cool thing that people want if they can have any sort of superhero gift, flight or telepathy or healing. Yeah. But we're talking about telepathy now in a scientific discovery, because that's what your blog article focuses on, brain synchronization. And what does that look like? What is this discovery?
Yeah, well, this is a surprising discovery actually made by a team of scientists from Spain who discovered that when two people enter into a conversation, even if they're strangers, that very quickly their brains will synchronize. The electrical activity in their brains will become synchronized. And this brain entrainment suggests that as we engage one another, we begin to connect with one another in subconscious ways that we're not even aware of.
So how did they even test that or research this?
Well, what they did is they had 30 people, 15 pairs of people, men and women, aged between 20 and 30 years of age, that they equipped with EEG technology, an EEG cap, and they just asked them to engage in a conversation, share their opinions, talk about sports, entertainment, and they noticed in the electrical activity the synchronization that took place as they began to have those conversations.
So the synchronization, it sounds really interesting. I feel like we can sometimes experience that in just our own way of saying, I really click when I talk to this person. Yeah. So it's interesting to find out that it's something that is actually happening in this neurological level. But what does that mean? Like, how can we engage in that discovery when we think about humans and human interaction?
Yeah. Well, to me, this is really interesting because I think we take for granted how special and unusual we are as human beings. And anthropologists increasingly are recognizing that human beings seem to be one of a kind. We seem to be different than any other creature that has ever lived. And part of that difference is that we have a property called theory of mind, that we can recognize that other people have minds like us. And because of that, we can anticipate what they're thinking, what they're feeling, and we do this intuitively. And it could very well be that what was discovered with this electrical activity that synchronizes may very well be a neurological manifestation of this theory of mind capability. And we also, as human beings, have a capacity for entering into complex social relationships with one another. And again, it could very well be that this synchronization is a critical part of how we relate to one another in social terms.
Well, that you bring up theory of mind and you're talking about how we relate to each other. How can we understand that from a Christian perspective? Because this is all really fascinating, but it sounds a little bit like image of God talk.
Yeah. Well, to me, that's exactly right, is that this is an example of scientific evidence that seems to continue to affirm the notion that human beings have a special quality about us, and as Christians, we would call that the image of God. And so I see theory of mind, this capacity for socialization, other abilities we have like symbolism and what's called open-ended generative capacity are all scientific descriptors of what we would understand as Christians to be the image of God. And it's interesting that we seem to uniquely possess these qualities. And it's fascinating that we now are having more and more anthropologists talking about human exceptionalism, talking about human uniqueness. And that, to me, affirms the biblical view of human nature.
So let's say we're talking to a skeptic and they're familiar with theory of mind, but they're not sure what image of God is. Like, how would we then step into that conversation and use a discovery like this to share our faith? And what will we point to, say, in the Bible to say, like, here's how it's being, like, the discovery is affirming what we read here?
Well, we live in a world today where the view of human nature has been crafted by an evolutionary framework that we're not special, we're not exceptional in any way. And yet the science keeps indicating that we are exceptional in a way that reflects the image of God. And this concept is critical for the gospel itself, that we have to establish that human beings are exceptional, that we bear God's image, because it's the image of God that allows us to enter into a relationship uniquely with our Creator. And so when we can establish that there's scientific credibility to that idea, it paves the way to the gospel.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. I love that. When we establish it through science, we can help show people that it's already affirmed in the words of the Bible. So thank you so much for that, Fuz. If you want to hear more from Fuz, check out reasons.org and search the Cells Design.